Welcome to today's deep dive. Whether you are prepping for a big meeting, catching up on some new perspectives, or you're just insanely curious about the complexities of the human experience, we are really glad you're here.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
Today, we are exploring a narrative that fundamentally challenges how we think about the lines drawn between our physical bodies, our minds, and, well, our spiritual lives.
Right. We're looking at an excerpt from a recent YouTube interview. It's titled Discovering God Together, Number 20, Interview with Brenda Dennis. And that's hosted on the channel Steve Reed, Partner with God for Peace and Prosperity.
Exactly.
And right up front, our goal today is to impartially explore the ideas and experiences exactly as Brenda shared them. We're looking at this through a lens of deep curiosity.
Because the trajectory of her life is genuinely hard to wrap your head around. It spans growing up as a child prodigy in the segregated South, surviving the height of the 1980s crack epidemic, navigating the inner workings of modern
Which
megachurches.
is a whole world in itself.
Oh, absolutely. And then it all culminates in a shocking medical discovery that retroactively recontextualized an entire lifetime of feeling like a boy trapped in a girl's body.
It's a compelling look at the intersection of faith, biology, and identity.
Hmm.
We often treat those three things as, entirely separate categories, sometimes even opposing forces.
Yeah, totally.
But Brenda's story forces us to look at how inextricably linked they can be, especially when you factor in the psychological anchor of unconditional love, which plays just a massive role from her earliest memories.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start right there in St. Petersburg, Florida. Brenda's early life paints a really fascinating picture. She was exceptionally gifted. We're talking about an IQ that the testing of the time couldn't even fully measure.
Right, she was literally off the charts.
Exactly. By sixth grade, she was doing 12th grade coursework. She had memorized Psalm 23 by the time she was 4 years old.
Her intellect was so pronounced that the school district actually wanted to advance her several grades. But her parents, who were financially stable and highly respected in their community, pushed back on that.
They wanted to protect her social development.
Exactly. They struck an agreement with the superintendent where Brenda and a few other gifted students would leave their standard classroom for advanced work but remain with their peers so they didn't miss out socially.
And her family was very put together. Her dad was voted the best dressed man in St. Pete.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he wore tailored suits, fedoras, Stacey Adams shoes. And her mom was a licensed cosmetologist who would take Brenda to this high-end boutique called Slim's on Saturdays.
Okay.
This was where the upper crust of society hung out, governors' wives, affluent women.
Hmm.
Her mom would actually have young Brenda stand up on the alteration platform and recite scripture to these women. Externally, it's a life of extreme privilege, safety, and very clear expectations.
But internally, there was a severe disconnect. In the interview, Brenda describes being dressed in candy curls, colored ribbons, and big fluffy dresses with petticoats.
The classic Southern Sunday best.
Right. Yet her internal reality was entirely different. She didn't want the petticoats. She wanted to throw on a pair of jeans, climb trees, jump on the roof. She constantly felt a profound sense of gender dysphoria, even though she obviously didn't possess the vocabulary for it as a child in that era.
I think what stands out most from her childhood is how her mother intuitively handled that tension. They played this game called I Ain't Gonna Tell Your Mama,
That is such an incredible detail.
isn't it? Whenever Brenda felt overwhelmed, she would come home and say, I don't want to talk to my mom today. I need a friend. And her mother would seamlessly slip into an alternate persona. She'd sit down and say, I ain't gonna tell your mama. What do we need to talk about? Your mama ain't gonna know.
What's fascinating here is the psychological impact of that mechanism.
Hmm.
Her mother was essentially creating a designated safe space, completely stripping away parental authority and judgment so her child could simply process her feelings.
Yeah.
The psychological impact of that unconditional acceptance is immense. Later in the interview, Brenda actually addresses the audience directly about this.
Right. She makes a very direct plea.
Yes, she pleads with parents not to reject their LGBTQIA children. Her core argument is sociological. If a child cannot find a safe harbor at home to discuss their identity, they will seek out an outlet elsewhere. And historically, that pushes vulnerable kids into unsafe environments.
And right into the orbit of people who do not have their best interests at heart.
Precisely.
Which is a heartbreakingly accurate foreshadowing of Brenda's own early adulthood. As we move into the 1980s, Brenda is dealing with intense internal pressure. She had always secretly had crushes on girls, but she felt this heavy cultural and familial expectation to give her aging parents a grandchild.
So she makes a drastic choice.
She does. In 1986, she marries a man, which she notes is the only male intimate partner she ever had.
But you can only suppress your core identity for so long before that pressure demands a release valve. For Brenda and her husband, that release valve became the drug culture of the late 1980s.
They got swept up in the crack wars.
They did, eventually becoming heavy users and dealers.
Hmm.
It's a really drastic shift from the sheltered, gifted child reciting scripture in high-end boutiques.
The survival stories she shares from this period are incredibly intense, like cinematic. There's one specific night where she's walking through a housing project carrying a significant amount of Colombian cartel drugs to sell.
Oh boy.
Yeah. A man corners her, puts a gun directly to her temple, and demands her product.
And this is where we see how deep her resolve, or maybe her desensitization, had actually become.
Exactly. She doesn't panic. She looks at the man and calmly tells him to pull the trigger. She reasons with him, explaining that if she hands over the cartel's product, the cartel won't just kill her, they will torture her, and pieces of her body will end up in the ocean. So she flat out refuses.
So the man pulls the trigger, but the gun jams. He tries to clear the chamber, looks up at her with eyes as big as silver dollar pancakes, drops the weapon, and just runs.
And Brenda mentions he was found dead a few days later.
It's chilling. And then there's another instance where she and her husband are in a hotel room waiting to restock. She consumes so much product that her body goes numb and she slips into a coma.
And her husband can't even risk calling an ambulance.
Because the room is filled with illegal narcotics. So she's out for days. She describes seeing a bright light circling her head during this time, and when she finally wakes up, she is completely unharmed.
What's crucial here isn't just the sheer fact of her survival, but how Brenda interprets it. She views these moments entirely through a theological lens of divine protection.
Right. It informs her entire worldview.
She uses these stories to directly challenge the religious narrative that God abandons or punishes people who are gay or living outside traditional moral boundaries. For Brenda, the fact that she was protected while entrenched in addiction and illegal activities is proof of a God who protects the marginalized, even at their lowest points.
And mirroring that perceived divine love was the very tangible, relentless love of her mother. At one point, Brenda decided she'd rather be homeless than bring police attention to her parents' house.
Which makes sense.
Right. But when she told her mother's only condition was, "Will you take food for me if I come find you?"
That's incredible.
Her mother would literally have a friend drive her into the most dangerous crack houses in the city just to track Brenda down and hand her a plate of food. No lectures, no condemnation, just making sure her kid was fed.
Brenda equates this to the biblical parable of the lost sheep,
Right.
the shepherd leaving the 99 to find the one. This era eventually reaches a breaking point when Brenda is arrested and spends 83 days in county jail. And while incarcerated, she discovers she is pregnant. Now, she had been using heavily during the critical first trimester, which obviously carries severe medical risks for fetal development.
But miraculously, the baby is born perfectly healthy. For Brenda, realizing that she could finally give her parents the grandchild they wanted was the ultimate catalyst.
She quit drugs cold turkey.
Just like that. She completely turns her life around, goes to college, majors in mass communications, and actually wins a scholarship to a summer program at UCLA.
Which lands her an internship at the LA Times. Moving to Los Angeles represents a massive paradigm shift for her. She describes it as finding a community where she could finally breathe.
She was able to immerse herself in the gay community, experience pride events, and just let out all the aspects of her identity she had spent decades trying to numb.
But the reality of life pulls her back. Her parents' health starts failing, and she has to leave LA, the first place she truly felt at home, to return to Florida. The emotional weight of returning is crushing.
She's juggling grief, parenting, relationship stress, and the resurgence of this profound gender dysphoria.
Right. She starts growing facial hair, dressing in her dad's old tailored suits and fedoras, and even consults a doctor about a sex change.
The compounded stress leads to a severe nervous breakdown. She begins experiencing suicidal ideation and is ultimately admitted to a psychiatric hospital by her partner.
And while she's in the psychiatric ward, she refuses the prescribed medication. She hides it under her tongue, opting instead to process her trauma through writing.
She shares a poem in the interview that talks about detoxifying her system from past frustrations and realizing that her blindfolds are finally off. It's a period of intense, forced introspection.
Which sets the stage for her coming out to her mother, and it is honestly one of the most profound moments in the interview.
It really is.
Brenda calls her mom on speakerphone from her girlfriend's house. She's terrified, finally ready to confess that she is gay. But before she can even get the sentence out, her mom stops her and says, I know you're gay. What do you want? I raised you. How could I not know? I was just waiting for you to be comfortable enough to tell me.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that reaction highlights a core theme of the interview: the difference between operating out of wisdom versus operating out of wounds.
That's a powerful distinction.
The source material draws a very sharp contrast here. Many of Brenda's partners came from conservative or military families who completely rejected them upon finding out they were gay. But Brenda's mother, despite her own traditional background, welcomed them all.
They called her Mama May.
Yes, she became known as Mama May in the local gay community because she would invite Brenda's ex-girlfriends over just to ensure they had a mother figure. Brenda credits this to her mother possessing a deep spiritual wisdom that superseded cultural wounds.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. After her parents pass away, Brenda's search for community continues, eventually leading her into the doors of a massive Pentecostal megachurch in Tampa.
A friend buys her a ticket for a $99 weekend church cruise.
Right. And while she's sitting on the deck of this ship, she experiences something highly unusual. She describes feeling a literal lift off her body. She actually says out loud, "Am I not gay anymore?" She notes that the sky suddenly looked bluer, the water looked greener.
This initiates a period of intense religious fervor and transformation. Following that cruise, she returns home and experiences what she describes as an undeniable prompting to come back home to your first love.
So she undertakes a severe 3-day fast, no food, only water.
Sitting in a chair, undergoing what she views as a spiritual purging. When it's over, she looks in the mirror and perceives that her physical features have miraculously softened and become more feminine.
And remember, up until this week, she had been heavily leaning into a masculine presentation. Suits, ties, the Stacey Adams shoes. But she feels instructed by God to purge all of that. She gets rid of every piece of men's clothing she owns.
Simultaneously, a friend reaches out, saying they felt prompted by God to take Brenda on a shopping spree for feminine clothes and to help her relearn female mannerisms.
But this introduces a devastating era of cognitive dissonance. By 2012, Brenda is an ordained Pentecostal minister. She is actively evangelizing and reporting miraculous occurrences in her ministry.
She mentions seeing 3 people walk out of wheelchairs.
Exactly. Yet, despite her spiritual standing and these miracles, the church leadership requires her to undergo deliverance to pray away the gay. Let's actually pause here because the concept of deliverance is central to understanding the psychological toll this took. How exactly does that function in this kind of church environment?
In many charismatic or Pentecostal traditions, deliverance is a ministry aimed at freeing a person from spiritual oppression or demonic influence. In this specific context, the church leadership viewed her historical sexual orientation and gender dysphoria not as psychological or biological realities, but as spiritual afflictions that needed to be forcibly prayed out of her.
They labeled her core identity an abomination.
Right. So you have a person who is experiencing genuine spiritual connection on one hand, but is simultaneously being told by her spiritual community that the essence of who she is fundamentally flawed and demonic.
Brenda admits in the interview that she essentially faked her way through the deliverance process just to survive it, because she knew orientation isn't something that just turns off like a light switch.
She references the author Brene Brown to articulate the damage this caused.
The distinction between guilt and shame.
Exactly. Brown famously differentiates the two. Guilt says, I made a mistake. But shame says, I am a mistake. For 13 or 14 years, Brenda lived under the crushing weight of that shame.
She describes preaching passionately, experiencing the highs of ministry, and then going home to cry herself to sleep every single night because the environment she was in demanded she view herself as a mistake.
And the human body simply cannot sustain that level of chronic, internalized stress without consequence.
It really can't. Between 2020 and 2025, Brenda suffers 5 separate strokes. Her neurologist is totally baffled. She doesn't have the standard medical precursors, no high blood pressure, no history of heart disease.
Brenda attributes the strokes directly to the physiological toll of carrying that immense shame and suppressing her true self for so long.
Amazingly, she emerges from these 5 strokes without any long-term cognitive or physical deficits. But the strokes force a reckoning. Which brings us to December 2023. This is the turning point of the entire narrative.
She's in prayer, feeling overwhelmed by the ongoing struggle with her identity. She says she receives a clear message that she can't pray this away, followed by an instruction to Google 3 specific letters: CAH.
She types it into the search bar, and she discovers she has a condition called congenital adrenal hyperplasia. It falls under the umbrella of DSDs, or differences in sexual development.
This is where the medical science entirely recontextualizes her life. To really understand the magnitude of this discovery, we need to look at what CAH actually does biologically.
Right, because for a lot of people, when we talk about biological sex, we just think of X and Y chromosomes. So how does a condition like this actually work in utero?
It's a great question. Congenital adrenal hyperplasia is a genetic condition that affects the adrenal glands, which sit right above the kidneys. In a developing fetus, these glands produce essential hormones. But with CAH, the glands lack a specific enzyme.
Okay.
To compensate for this lack, the glands go into overdrive, and in doing so, they produce excessive amounts of androgens.
Androgens are male sex hormones, right, like testosterone.
Exactly. Now, if the fetus has XX chromosomes, meaning they will be assigned female at birth based on their primary physical characteristics, this flood of androgens during critical windows of gestation can have profound effects.
Wow.
While the external body may develop female, the prenatal brain is being bathed in male hormones. Neurologically, the brain pathways are being masculinized.
So when Brenda spent her entire childhood and early adulthood saying she felt like a boy trapped in a girl's body, she wasn't speaking metaphorically at all.
Not at all. It was a literal biological reality. Her neurological map, her behavioral inclinations, her internal sense of self, they were all heavily influenced by that prenatal androgen exposure.
That is incredible.
It is a documented medical variance. Her identity wasn't the result of a spiritual failing, a demon, or a psychological trauma. It was a physiological reality of how her brain developed before she was even born.
The peace that this single Google search brings her is absolute. Decades of internalized homophobia, theological confusion, and self-hatred just evaporate. She understands that God didn't make a mistake, and she wasn't a mistake.
She mentions that today she no longer experiences same-sex attraction and has chosen to remain celibate for over 15 years,
Right.
fully embracing this unique intersection of her biology and her faith.
It completely reshapes how she views her calling. Today, Brenda runs a ministry called GLOW, which stands for God's Love Overpowers Warfare.
This raises an important question about how to minister to people without judgment, which is exactly what she focuses on. Brenda states her goal is to give an ear to hear instead of a mouth to judge.
She firmly asserts that advocating for marginalized communities isn't just a political issue of gay rights, it is a fundamental issue of human rights.
There's a beautiful story she shares about this approach in action. She's at a Dunkin' Donuts drive-thru, but feels compelled by God to park and go inside.
With zero context.
Right. She's standing near the counter, completely unsure why she's there. She feels prompted to call over an employee she has never met, and out of nowhere asks the woman if her child is gay.
The employee is understandably stunned and asks how Brenda could possibly know that.
Brenda simply introduces herself as a minister and offers a listening ear. That brief, unconventional interaction turns into a profound friendship and mentorship. Brenda provides this mother with the tools to understand her son, eventually helping to fully heal the strained relationship between the two of them.
Brenda wraps up the interview by stating that she really doesn't mind looking crazy for God. She acknowledges that when she was living a suppressed life, conforming to the church's expectations, everybody liked her. But the moment she started advocating for marginalized people, she lost friends.
She relates her journey to the Apostle Paul.
Uh-huh.
His journey was transformative, radical, and it required him to be entirely unafraid of becoming an outcast. Brenda has accepted that fulfilling her purpose means operating outside the lines of mainstream acceptance.
So what does this all mean? When you step back and look at the entirety of Brenda's story, it forces you to reflect on your own perspectives. We see the life-saving impact of a parent's radical, unconditional love. We see the sheer resilience required to survive both the physical dangers of the streets and the psychological dangers of a judgmental pulpit.
And most profoundly, we see the incredible moment when unwavering faith and modern medical science finally intersect to remove decades of crushing shame. It's a powerful reminder that our biological realities and our spiritual journeys are far more intertwined than we often acknowledge. It really challenges rigid categories and urges us to consider how often we judge what we simply don't yet have the science to understand.
Which leaves us with a final thought for you to explore on your own. If a medical revelation in the year 2023 could retroactively explain a lifetime of spiritual and internal struggle for Brenda, what other hidden biological realities might be silently writing the scripts of our own lives, just waiting for science to finally give us the vocabulary to understand ourselves? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Take care and keep learning.